Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Anna, and I'm delighted to have in the house today Dr. Heather Hammerstedt. So I will give you guys all the links to her website, her socials, but I am excited to talk to her, especially about emotional eating, and then we see where we go from there. But first of all, Heather, thank you for coming
Yeah,
on
for
this
sure.
podcast. Yeah, thank
Thanks
you.
for having me.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit because I know you're in the health space for quite a while. Just about, let's see where emotional eating actually starts with. Like, I think that as adults, we just say, oh, I'm an emotional eater and I eat when I'm stressed. But in your opinion, does it start in childhood or is it something that we just pick up along the way because food is just convenient and around the corner to use to numb ourselves?
Well, let me step back and just kind of explain my background a little bit, just
Yes.
briefly, just so that people understand kind of where I'm coming at. I am a medical doctor in the US. I trained in emergency medicine, and I have a secondary certification in lifestyle medicine, which is basically using the kind of science of food, sleep, stress
Mhm.
management, movement, mindfulness for the prevention and reversal of disease. And I've been an integrative nutrition coach for about 18 years,
Okay.
and run a company called Holist where we do coaching around food
Hmm.
and really understanding how your brain and your body works. You can tell I
Hmm.
come from a science background. I was a
Yeah.
biochemist and in allopathic medicine here in the US. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to frame around some of that.
Excellent.
So in terms of, I guess, childhood, um, I think some of it can. I think it depends on like um, whether it's like family environment or
Hmm.
like a modeling behavior or emotional experiences, especially traumatic or emotionally challenging experiences, especially around food.
Yeah.
As well as kind of food availability. A lot of people have like some food scarcity issues going into that,
Absolutely.
as well
Hmm.
as like stress and coping for kids who may have had kind of chronic stress when they were younger.
Right.
So I think that I think that it can in a way, but doesn't always. I think maybe a good way to start would be maybe talking a little bit about like my view on emotional eating and what I think it really
Mhm.
is. Does that sound okay?
Yeah. Sure.
Good.
Go ahead.
And for everybody who's watching, I just finished a night shift and it's like 7 o'clock in the morning here, so I'm still in scrubs and kind of messy. So
This is as
uh,
real as it gets.
yeah, exactly.
That's
Um,
good.
so I think of emotional eating sort of like I think you could reframe it to be like food addiction. You think you could
Yeah.
reframe it to be like compulsory eating. I think
Mhm.
basically, if you think of it about like the person can be addicted to food,
Sure.
and I feel like because of kind of brain imaging, like fMRI imaging, and
Mhm.
other studies of really figuring out how this sort of overeating affects the pleasure centers of the brain, are really like showing that that's the case. And then it can really like the fMRIs that they do, those functional MRIs, basically like take an MRI of you like while you're doing something or thinking
Mhm.
something and like see what types of where your kind of brain like lights up, which so
Mhm.
that's basically what that is. It does the same as it does like cocaine and
Sure.
heroin are also activated by food by or like by highly palatable foods, sort of
Yeah.
those processed foods that the
Mhm.
lab coat men make
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
taste just perfectly. So sugar, fat, and salt. And so they also trigger like feel good chemicals like dopamine
Mhm.
in your
Mhm.
body, that helps you experience pleasure around that. So it's like a reward pathway. So
Mhm.
even though your body isn't necessarily using the food for fuel, you're like buffering your some other need or emotion,
Mhm.
or because of your kind of hormonally haywired because of maybe decades of how you've been using food. So for
Yeah.
some people, like giving up those foods, like can be really as difficult as it can be for alcohol or drugs because those reward
Yeah.
signals from those highly palatable foods like really override your other kind of signals of fullness and satisfaction. So like, the definition of addiction is doing something over and over again that doesn't serve your interest despite its bad effects on your
Yeah.
family life, work, body, health, right? So that's really what this is. So the question is really for me is to talk about like, you know, why is that happening? Like we could talk about gut health because like
Mhm.
eating nutrient dense food to our gut means that the bacteria, the good bacteria, are happier, and we
Hmm.
make a lot of our mood hormones like actually in our gut. Is
Yeah.
it what are you trying to buffer? Like,
Yeah,
can you,
I think yeah,
you
I
know?
think yeah, I think I agree completely with you. Like it is, in my opinion, a form of addiction. I
Yeah,
don't think it's an excuse.
yeah,
Like, when people say, "Oh, I'm an emotional eater, I cannot stop." I think that some people literally cannot stop,
yeah,
especially if they are eating those types of foods, like highly
yeah,
palatable foods, full of chemicals, and just foods that I say, live on the shelf for 15 years.
yeah,
But I think, yes, it can come from childhood, what you said, like obviously, because we learn certain patterns and behaviors in childhood. But there is a moment where, for some reason, you become more drawn to those foods
yeah,
comparing to someone else. Like, is it availability because these foods are in general quite cheap comparing to maybe some foods that are more expensive but also richer in nutrients? It depends where you live. Do you have access to those foods or not? Do you have enough money to actually eat a variety of foods, or it's like, okay, it's burgers and pizza and something that is not so expensive, we're going to eat it all the time, and you're actually getting used to the taste,
yeah,
and it's just the way you eat. But on the other hand, you're not realizing, yes, you probably are getting some calories and nutrients, but you're not realizing that you're creating a connection with your brain, that these are the types of foods that you are consuming,
right.
and they are hitting pleasure centers, obviously. And for many people, it's just the way that they're also used to eating. So sometimes I feel like when I speak with my clients, they actually don't even see the connection, because it's just like what was on the table. Like, what else do you want me to eat? And the consequence of what was on the table, they catch up much later when you see that this has become, a habit. But what you said about, the whole connection and the food choices that we make, do you think that an average person, okay, you're in the States, I'm in Europe, right? Like an average person goes grocery shopping, right? And they are faced with increased costs and availability of foods. And is it fresh or not fresh, or, pesticides, no pesticides? It's like it's this whole topic, right? What is healthy even today? Do you think that big companies that produce food and sell food, they're partially responsible for having
Oh,
this
yeah,
availability of these foods, and then you consume them because they're cheaper, but
yeah.
it causes a problem of obesity, diabetes, and all the health related problems because you consume those foods?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, food science is fascinating,
Yeah.
but it is just that. Like they are studying what foods make things taste the best, and the companies are, of course, taking advantage of that because they want to make
Mm-hmm.
money. And
Yeah.
there's a reason why, like, I went to medical school in Philadelphia. There's a reason why there is a huge metabolic disaster there of
Mm-hmm.
obesity and metabolic diseases because you like sometimes can't even get to a grocery store. Like if
Right.
you don't have a car and
Mm-hmm.
you're in the middle of like a really socioeconomically depressed area, they can go to the corner store and get,
But do
or
you
order
think,
pizza.
when we talk about obesity, I personally believe that, people will say, oh, there's genetics and then there is socioeconomic factor and this and
Yeah,
that. But I personally stand by the fact that if you're eating when you're hungry,
yeah.
there are no issues. And I think that's why I think that any overeating or emotional eating or binging are in fact one of the main predictors for obesity. What do you think?
Uh, yeah, I mean, it is a very complex metabolic disease, obesity is, and
Yeah.
we could talk about that for ages. But I do think, well, I guess hunger is it's a topic all on its own, right? Like,
Mhm. Yeah.
I kind of think there's three kinds of hunger. There's like psychological hunger, which is what I'm talking about with like filling that reward.
Yeah.
And then there's like social hunger, which is like I always eat potato chips while I watch the soccer game.
Mhm. Yeah,
Or,
everything. Well, yeah.
we always have this for this holiday, or this is what we
Mhm.
have for Sunday dinner. And then there's like the bio hunger, which is like when you're actually like
Physically.
physically hungry. And so I think analyzing that a little bit and deciding that, is it really hunger? Is it really that bio hunger that I need to feed myself fuel for that nutrient dense kind of good unprocessed food? Or is it filling something else? I think the psychological hunger, I think, is the one that we're talking about the most. And I think what's
Mm-hmm.
interesting about that from like a scientific perspective is that we know that as your weight increases, your dopamine levels decrease. So that
Yeah.
means that as you get more and more overweight, that dopamine, like happy, satisfied, rewarded, becomes
Mm-hmm.
less available. And so lower levels of dopamine and
Mm-hmm.
depression, anxiety, difficulty going through kind of practical life, you feel the need to fill that back up. And so, and your body is happier when it is those highly palatable reward foods. And so you're, it's science, right? I mean, it's like the good news is as your weight decreases, the dopamine increases. Um, and that's why people who lose weight also kind of seem to feel happier, more rewarded,
Mm-hmm.
more energetic. But that like gut brain access is just super interesting. And like I always try to tell people, like, yes, it's like not an excuse that it's like an addiction, but I think the understanding the science behind it keeps you from beating yourself up over it and realizing that like your failure to control it isn't necessarily like a willpower issue. It's like you're not going to
Yes.
become all that biology because you're like a better thinker. You know what I mean? It's like it's
Right.
understanding it and like getting like the skill power that you need to be able to like shift your hormones, rewire your brain. And I know, Anna, that that's what you do and that's what we do here at Holist,
Yeah.
is like trying to really figure out like what is it, like why am I eating, what should I be eating, and when should I be eating it. But when it comes to that why is like really big hard work for a lot of people to figure out.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to say, eat when you're physically hungry because like
Right,
the physical symptoms, but there is a reason why people eat when they are not hungry. There is a
right,
reason why people need food to fill a void or
yeah,
to distract themselves, or is it something habitual? It takes a lot of work for you to actually address the underlying issue, but also for you to say honestly to yourself, I am abusing food because food
yeah,
is not going to solve my problems. That's like you have to be on a different level of thinking to detach yourself from what you're doing, to look yourself and say, you know what, this thing that I have been doing with food, it's really causing me more problems. And I
yeah,
think that the reason why people don't do that is because they don't have another coping mechanism. No one teaches you ever how
right.
to deal with certain difficult emotions and with
Well,
certain
it's the
difficult
same
tasks in your
reason
life.
why people don't get off cocaine and why they don't get off meth and why they don't stop gambling. You know what I mean? It's like it's all of those things. It's like it is very hard to admit something like that.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
so
absolutely. But do you think, so we talked a little bit about the food industry and, they are not making things easy for us because aside from making highly palatable foods, they're also marketing it so well,
yeah,
like you want to try those foods, right? But there is another movement that I'm wondering what's your opinion on this. So, like when the whole body positivity movement started, I have noticed more and more that not only we're celebrating different shapes and sizes, which is awesome, like finally we have that, in front of us on social media, but I have also noticed that someone who is metabolically not healthy is also presenting its herself or himself whatever as a healthy person and claiming that it's okay to be 200 pounds overweight or whatever as long as you're happy in your body. What do you
right.
think of that? Are those kind of messages, let's say, a free pass for people who are like, well, okay, I mean, if she's happy then I can also binge and eat whatever I want, and like it will not affect me. What do you think? Are those movements sometimes going to extremes?
Um, I think it can. I've had a lot of the same thoughts as you as I've been watching it because like I um I want people to be healthy and happy, and you can do that at different sizes, like for sure. But if you're talking about the people that are already kind of metabolically off kilter when it comes to this, complex metabolic disease called obesity, I think that promoting self acceptance and like reducing body shaming and discrimination is super important. And
Absolutely.
embracing your body is super important. Um, no size is the right size for everybody. But I do think that some people may sort of, I don't know if it's misusing or misinterpreting what that message is
Mm-hmm.
as like an excuse for overindulgence. And I
Yeah.
think that that mostly happens when people like think that body positivity doesn't mean that they should care about their health or
Yes. Mm-hmm.
kind of self control, which I don't think is supposed to be the intent of the movement. I think that
Exactly.
I think that I always try to frame weight management not as weight loss, but as like weight
Yes.
wellness and
Mm-hmm.
the goal of like long term health and longevity of lifespan. I don't know if you've read that Outlive
Yep.
book. It was really
Mm-hmm.
interesting. We're doing a book club in it in my Facebook group right now. And I think again, education is key, right? The more you make someone think about that and understand like how their neural pathways are working in their brain around their decision making and what the food is actually doing, I think a lot of people can get better results because they can really like internalize their why of why they're making healthy choices. Because
Yes.
like we all want to just, if someone tells us externally to restrict something, we're going to rebel, right? That's just the
Of
way that
course.
we are.
Yes.
But I think that if you really get it, like conversations like this of really stimulating people's
Mm.
brains around like, why am I doing this? Even if it's just a halt when you're reaching for the cookies, of like, what did they say about hunger again? I think education is really key.
Yeah, and I think like when we speak about food freedom and body positivity, I think that body positivity was necessary to come along because there was so much shame
Yeah.
around bodies that were not the perfect size, the perfect fit,
Well, there
small,
still is,
triple.
but yeah.
Exactly. So we are trying to get away from that. My only concern is that it can go to that extent that like because we are not supposed to be size zero, we can be that size which is not metabolically healthy,
Mhm.
whatever that is for someone, and we promote it for reasons that are maybe not always ethical as well. But in my opinion, I don't think that food freedom and allowing yourself to be the different size means that you're eating junk food 24/7 and
Right.
drowning yourself in alcohol. Like, I don't, for me, food freedom is literally not escaping your life, but just like eating different types of foods, more or less nutrient dense, where everything can kind of fit. It's not, I think that that's where the problem is that once people have decided that they no longer want to diet, they go into this, oh, food freedom. I'm
Yeah.
free to eat what I want. And then it's a binge fest, but on things that will harm them at some point, not maybe right away. And
I
this is where, you know,
Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I mean,
no,
I think of food freedom as being like I am free of food controlling me,
yes,
and that
true.
like I mean, I'm going to choose to eat healthy, but for me, it's like I don't have to have like the nurses in the emergency department are the worst. There's like pizza and candy and like everything just everywhere, right? And like I can walk past that and think like I don't have to make the choice to have that, right? And I think once you do that kind of harder emotional and introspective work, like you and I help people do, and really understand that they have that choice, I think that's where the freedom comes from, is that you can use food
Yeah.
as fuel and not like have to have 12 cookies or like, those kind of things.
Yeah, and I think that there is a moment where people, when they jump off the dieting wagon, they almost have a reason to prove how free they are. And in
Yeah.
that, conquest to prove like, oh, look how much I'm not dieting, they're going to this other extreme
Yeah.
of, cookies and pizzas and everything, which can be, of course, a consequence of them depriving themselves of those foods for a very long time. And then it's kind of the rebellion, like, I just want those foods. But also, I have seen quite a bit of people who are so tired of being controlled by food that now they want to kick it back and be like, okay, I'm going to eat whatever I want. And usually those choices are actually not doing them a favor, but
Right.
it's more causing them issues. So I think that's a little bit where this terminology is not quite clear for me.
Yeah.
What people are doing with food, but
I
yeah.
think with food freedom too is like when you're not letting food control you, you're not shaming yourself either,
Yes,
right? Which is good,
which
but
is
it
good.
also, I think, also means that like if you're going to choose, to be unprocessed, healthy, nutrient dense, mostly whole foods, right? Like we want people to be
Yeah,
doing,
yeah,
that if they do have a cookie that the nurses brought in, it's not the end of the
mhm,
world. Like it's
yeah,
not, doesn't mean you need to like go off the cliff and like throw out your whole eating plan because you
yes.
treated yourself too. And I think that's an
Mhm.
important thing for people to think about.
When it comes, I agree. When it comes to emotional eating, do you believe that that's a symptom of a much maybe more serious mental problem, or do you feel that it's like a problem on its own?
I think it's probably in some way connected. I mean, I think it's not like, I don't think mental problem is the right term, but maybe, we all have things in life that are hard. And if we, as you
Mhm.
said before, if we don't have the skill of a way to cope with that, um, then that is a mental health problem.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're using something external to you as a crutch to get through that is also a mental health problem. I mean, that's why I think everyone should go to a therapist. and and so, I mean, I'm not saying that like if you emotionally eat that like you're bipolar or something like
Absolutely
that,
not.
but it's
Mhm.
like it's not the coping mechanism that's going to serve you. And
Mhm.
maybe therapy and friendship and movement and mindfulness is best.
What do you think about this whole mindful, eating, intuitive eating? I have noticed that for a lot of people, it's so vague,
Yeah.
like in terms of how do I do it? Like I have either been on a diet, meaning following a plan that is so strict. I am all for rules. I don't know how to choose what I want to eat on my own. So if you let me eat whatever I want, it's going to be a mess. I
Yeah.
personally believe that a mess is necessary in the transition period
Yeah.
and nothing to be afraid of because that's how you're going to actually learn what you like to eat or
Yeah.
not like to eat.
And how
But
it makes you feel. Yeah.
exactly. But how do you think that people should approach if they want to, end emotional eating and start eating nutrient-dense food? Where should they start, in your opinion?
Um, well, those are two different questions.
Hmm. Yep.
When The first question was mindful eating. So I have like a 90-minute training that I have on this that I'm more than willing to give you to put in the show
Well,
notes
we do.
here. It's
Hmm.
helpful on mindful eating, and so I could obviously talk about that forever. I think intuitive eating and mindful eating are two different things.
Yes. Hmm.
Mindful eating for me is like being mindful of what it is that I'm choosing, when I'm eating it, why I'm eating it, where my food came from,
Yes.
and making a choice about that.
Hmm.
Intuitive eating is sort of like listening to your body to know what you want to eat, which I think is a pretty complex thing for
Hmm.
people to figure out. And I'm not sure that I would think if you were eating primarily processed, highly palatable food that you're going to be able to figure that out. I think you would have to
Yeah,
like
it's hard. It's hard.
unprocess, yeah, unprocess your food, less fat, salt, and sugar, and then feel how those things make you feel when you have them again.
Yeah.
And that I think is where you start to get to an intuitive eating. So I feel like mindfulness has to come first before the
Hmm.
intuitive part.
Yeah, I
Um,
think that the education is very important, right? Like for you to be to indulge yourself into this concept of I'm gonna be mindful with where the food came from and I'm gonna be an intuitive eater, you first need to really educate yourself, like how is
yeah,
processed foods affecting you versus unprocessed foods. And I think
yeah,
that's step number
live
one
and experiment.
because yeah, exactly, because based off of that you can make the next step and be like, oh, okay, so maybe I should eat less of the processed foods.
Right.
But then starts the okay, so there is now like a range of unprocessed foods, and now it's the choice of what's for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I think that's where there are steps, of course, with intuitive eating and the rules around that. But I think for a lot of people in the beginning, in order
Yeah.
for them to not give up on intuitive eating, there has to be a structure, which
Yeah.
will be like, okay, let's see. what foods do you like to eat? Do you know what I mean? And then let's make a meal out of that. And then you can sit with it and see, do you like the texture and the flavor and the warmth and whatever it is? And then, you make like a mental check, or you take a picture of the meal to make
How
it
does
for
it
the
make you
next
feel?
time.
Yeah.
Exactly. How does it make you feel? Like in the beginning, you don't really know. But if you tell people to eat intuitively, the first thing that they will tell you, oh, it's going to be crispy cookies all day long.
Yeah.
Because intuitively, it's not
Yeah.
really how it works. But I think in the beginning, in order for them to not slip into that binge mode and then just to eat whatever, I think you can have a sort of structure, meal by meal, to help them navigate, processed versus unprocessed foods.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, like I said, it was kind of getting at, it's like when your second question was like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you start? Well, I think how you start is being working on being a mindful eater.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I do think that a lot of people do need some structure around what their plate is going to look like to start to eat more unprocessed because a lot of people just have never done it. They've
Do
never
you have some
eaten
rules for your clients? How do you help them organize their plate?
Um, so I try not to talk about calories because I feel like
Mhm.
calories are very restrictive for people, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to be like 90 years old and counting calories,
Oh my
but
God.
I
Yeah.
am going to know what my plate is going to look like. And so I try to have them aim for like half of it, colorful veggies and fruits,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Mm-hmm.
making sure that the other half is split between high quality fat and proteins, and whether that protein wants to come from plants or if it wants to come from animal, I kind of leave that up to them. Lifestyle
Mm-hmm.
medicine is a pretty plant-based type
Mm-hmm.
of practice, but I don't enforce that on people because what I want them to do is just to eat things that are real, and I try to be very concrete about it. And it's like, if it was born or it was grown, then you should eat it. But if it doesn't, if it comes in a box or even a can or a
Mm-hmm.
bag, then you have to start thinking a little bit more about what happened to get it there
Okay.
and how inflammatory that's going to be for your body and whether that's going to get your results. And so, what we do is we actually have our clients take pictures of their food, and we
Mm-hmm.
watch it through an app and can give them feedback. And if at the end of the week they have their coaching call and they've made their goals and they're feeling better and their pants are
Mm-hmm.
fitting better, then like that's what your plate should look like. And it might look different for me in terms of how much protein I need versus how
Yes.
much they need. And that sort of depends what your goals are, right? Like for me, I'm trying to build muscle, so I'm going to have more protein than somebody else might. So that's kind of how I
Mm-hmm.
think about
But let me ask you one more thing. Like, so you have the plate, right? But for example, how do you help people introduce maybe some foods that they really enjoy eating? Like, I don't know, a donut from time to time or a cookie without messing everything up and without going into that, oh, it's a cheat day
it.
type of
Yeah,
a thing. You know what I mean?
right.
Like,
Yeah.
usually, like, it's all or nothing. How do you navigate that with your clients in terms of helping them not freak out, as you said about the
Yeah.
nurse having the cookies? And if you eat
Well,
one, it's the end of
yeah.
the world,
I
you
think
know?
it's different for everybody. Some people can be pretty concrete about that and be like, I wanted a donut, and they're going to be fine. And there's other people who, maybe had an alcoholic dad who yelled at them at the dinner table when they were young, and they're not going to be able, and they were put on a diet when they were 10. You know what I mean? Like those
Yeah.
people are going to be a little different. And actually, all of our clients are actually assigned a mindset coach as well, whose job is to really work on those bigger, deeper issues and like helping
Mhm.
them not spiral out of control when they, make a choice that they hadn't perceived that they were going to make, right? Like with a
Yeah.
donut or something like that. But also to get at that, those deeper things that we've been talking about, why are you emotionally eating?
In the
And what
first
does that
place.
look like for you specifically? And how do we help you really get at that in a way that you recognize what you're buffering?
Hmm. Have you ever had experience with emotional eating yourself?
Um, I think mine was emotional alcohol when
Hmm.
I was buffering. I've never really been an emotional eater myself, which is
Okay.
why I can talk about it from a very kind of metacognition science
Hmm.
way. But my coaches, the mindset coaches, are the ones that are just so just gold on this stuff. You know, I have a
Amazing.
hypnotherapist, and we have
Wow.
life coaches, and we have an Ayurvedic person, and
Because
those,
it's a holistic approach, right? Like you need the
yeah,
medical part, but you also need the part with the, the psychological work, but you
yeah,
also need nutritionists. Like it's a whole thing. It's not
yeah.
just the food. There
Yeah,
is much
well, that's
more
why my
to it.
company's called Holist. It's a
Yes,
play off
exactly.
of like gastroenterologist, cardiologist, for a whole
Amazing. You're
person.
doing an amazing job. I mean, I know your company because,
Yeah,
well, we spoke
yeah,
before and I've been following. So kudos to you. You're doing amazing, amazing work.
yeah. Back at you.
And I've seen the results of the people you're working with. One last question before we wrap up for today. If you could tell someone just the first step that they can do in order to be more whole when it comes to food and their relationship with food, what would you tell them?
Um, I think determining what your hunger is.
Oh, wow, nice, good one.
I think that would be the first thing. You know, can you analyze? Is this really bio hunger? Is this a social cue? Is it psychological? And then if it is, then just ask yourself if you really need to eat, or if you need to offer that offer that reward to yourself in a different way. And if you
So,
are, it is a bio hunger, then I think, um, you know, they talk about a hunger scale of like -10
yeah.
being
Hmm.
ravenous and +10 being like, you know, you can't get up off,
Uncomfortably full.
yeah, you can't get off the dinner chair. And I tell people to start eating when they think they're at -4 and stop when they're at +4. And I
Yeah.
think if you think of that span sort of like a half of a wheel, that's really helpful. And I think pretty tangible and relatively easy to do. Like when my kids were young, you know, 4, 5, 6 years old, like they got it, you know.
Mhm.
And
But
in
it,
fact,
but
the
I think, yeah.
six-year-old used to write out. He'd write, be like, "I'm at, I'm at a -5. I need snacks," you know.
I need to, but it's a good way because, and just to close the chapter, but I think we were born with those cues.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like when you are a child, your mother is chasing you with food, like eat, 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 and you're like, I am not hungry.
yeah,
Then you come out from being outside for 3 hours, and you're like, where's the food?
yeah,
Like we had those cues early on for
yeah.
satiety and
And
for
they're
hunger.
different for most of
Exactly.
us. Yeah,
Exactly. And they're very different. And for, the reasons of cultural, dieting, exposure to social media, whatever era you grew up in, you became detached
yeah,
from your natural responses because you
yeah,
have been listening to so many things from the outside and not your own body. So I think that the advice that you gave, like you ask yourself the questions. Don't listen to what other people are
yeah.
saying.
Sure.
Just ask yourself, like, is it physical hunger or is it something else?
Yeah. I've got one of my kids is like a he was like born an intermittent faster. Like he
Really?
just he's not hungry. He's not hungry. He's not going to eat. And then all of a sudden it's like time to eat. You know what I mean? But like
Yeah.
he'll get
Mhm.
distracted and like be reading
Yeah,
and
but
forget.
don't you think if you would have forced him, you would have
Right?
messed up
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
natural ways of how he eats and when he doesn't eat, and like that's his thing, right? So
Yeah.
it's just let them do what they know best
Yeah.
instead of us pushing the narrative that maybe
Yeah.
we have learned somewhere else.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, Thank you so much for this chat. I really enjoyed it. And I will just inform my viewers in our small description box where they can find you.
Yeah. Sounds good.
And you mentioned the mindful eating video. We will also post that as well.
I have that, and then I have a shorter emotional eating training that's like 20 minutes. I can send you
Let's
both.
do that as well. So they have a lot of stuff that they can look at.
Sounds good. Thanks so much
Thank
for
you
having
so
me.
much. Bye.